Hey guys, welcome to That Florida Feeling. I hope everybody's doing good after this great cold snap of 2026. I don't like it. I'm not a fan of any of this. I want my warm sunshine back. I like the winter months because there's only snowbirds and not a lot of tourists. I'll be the first to say it. But I just don't like the cold. That's why I'm in Florida. All right, enough complaining. I hope you guys have had a great week. I do hope that everyone has made it through January finally for the 5th year in a row. But thank you guys for listening to the podcast. I really hope you have enjoyed it. If you ever want to hear a certain topic, just hit me up on any of the social media sites. YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. Or if you just want to say hey, say hey. I absolutely love meeting you guys. In fact, I've made some great friends just from this podcast alone. As always, thank you for listening. And if you have a quick second to give a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify, it really just helps the podcast get out to everybody else. So thank you so much. So I want you to imagine something, and don't close your eyes if you're driving. It's the 1990s. Cars are boxier, groceries are cheaper, life was simpler, not a person in the world tried to get you on a cell phone that you didn't own. And you're walking through the woods. And you're looking for alligators because it's Florida. And all of a sudden, you come across the worst thing in the world. A dead body. Because that's exactly what happened in Florida in 1994. February 1st to be exact. 2 hog hunters discovered the decomposing remains of a man who was known as John Doe 1 in the woods in Florida's northern Charlotte County. Charlotte County is in southern Florida, kind of near Punta Gorda. And, well, not kind of near, it's near. But to me, that would be like the worst thing. To be going hog hunting, you think you're going to have a great day, you're going to catch a big hog, and you find a dead body. Well, it didn't happen once, it happened at least 4 times. It happened again January 1st. What a way to start the year, 1996. And then again in March of 1996. And then again in April of 1996. Now at this point, you kind of got to wonder, is there a serial killer roaming South Florida? Well, there was. His name was Daniel Owen Conahan. I think I said that right. Conahan Jr. He had some issues. He was born May 11th, 1954. He didn't have a great life. He was actually born in Charlotte, North Carolina. He was in a middle-class family that eventually moved to Punta Gorda, Florida. Basically, he was raised in Florida because they moved kind of close to his first birthday, from everything I've seen. Daniel had a bit of a hard life, but when he was a teenager, he discovered that he was homosexual. And he was raised by Catholic parents. So this was the worst news they had ever heard in the world. This is the worst thing ever. They sent him to several psychiatrists, probably tried to pray the gay away, and nothing worked. Conahan frequently told his friends that his sexuality was not a disease, and how he was really angered at how he had been mistreated and traumatized by his parents. It wasn't the kind of thing you were open about in the 1970s, though. Conahan even told investigators, I found a gay bar. If I got there early, they didn't card me, and I could just feel normal. He said that even being gay was part of God's plan, too. He eventually graduated Miami Norland High School in 1973, where his classmates later described him as a quiet loner, barely participating in school activities. But he did go on to join the United States Navy in 1977. He was stationed at Naval Station Great Lakes in Illinois. I bet you he missed Florida then. But in 1978, a year later, he was basically very close, nearly major miss, to being court-martialed for taking fellow naval officers off base for sex. He was discharged a few months later after getting in a fight with a man upon whom he attempted to force oral sex. So basically, he didn't make it in the Navy. After his Navy discharge, he stayed in the Chicago area for 13 years and finally moved back to Punta Gorda to live with his elderly parents in 1993. I have a feeling that went very well. In 1995, he became a licensed practical nurse and graduated at the top of his class from Charlotte Vocational Technical Center. He went on to be employed by Charlotte Regional Medical Center in Punta Gorda. Conahan spent the majority of his spare time frequenting gay bars. He said, I learned that there are a lot of hitchhikers on US 41 from Northport to Fort Myers, and some of them were looking to perform sexual acts for money. So basically, he picked up prostitutes. But that's not really where he got his notoriety. He was believed to have been responsible for what is known as the Hog Trail murders. These took place between 1993 and 1996. He was their best suspect, and they pretty much had a lot of evidence. And the real reason that he was pinned for these murders is the victim, Richard Montgomery. They know, well, they don't know, but they really strongly believe that he committed the other ones. But this is the one that they are pretty absolute sure of. And what's worse is when they arrested him on this charge, several other remains were identified after he was already in jail. So basically, how did they figure this out? How did this start? Well, on February 1st, 1994, the mutilated corpse of a man was discovered in Port Charlotte, Florida, near Biscayne Boulevard by the two hog hunters I mentioned in the beginning of the episode. The body had been outside for about a month. It had rope burns on the skin. He had mutilated the body, and the man was not actually identified until a couple years ago in June of 2021. Charlotte County Sheriff's Office announced that new DNA testing was done, and it confirmed that the victim had been 27-year-old Gerald Jerry Lombard of Lowell, Massachusetts, who vanished from his Florida home in 1991 and was described often as a drifter. So that's one body. Then, like I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, what a way to start 1996. On January 1st, 1996, a Northport family dog brought home a male human skull to a residence. The residents claimed for months that the dog had been bringing them bones from the neighborhood, but didn't think anything of it until he brought a skull. Okay, I think if a dog brought me any human bone, I would still be calling the cops, I'm just saying. Police eventually recovered the chest and hip bones a half a mile from the residence after conducting a search a day after they called. More skeletal remains were discovered in an isolated wooded area, with just the right hand and chest still covered in flesh, so it had been there for a hot minute. Despite the fact that the cause of death was undetermined, the medical examiner assumed the body had been severely mutilated. The Northport skeleton has still not been identified and is referred to as the Sarasota County John Doe. That's kind of sad that they still don't know who that one is. On March 7th, 1996, a man traveling down Route 75 in Northport, Florida, pulled off onto Laramie Circle to go pee. He, unfortunately, probably peed in his pants, as he came across a naked male corpse positioned face up in the shape of a cross after he went just into the forest. So this one was not, super hidden. It's almost like he wanted them to find this one. The man immediately contacted the Northport Police Department. The victim was killed 10 days before he was discovered, with 4 stab wounds and his corpse being mutilated. The victim's feet were covered in cuts and scrapes, and slash marks could be seen on his upper body, indicating that the victim may have tried to run away from the murder in the moments right before he was killed. There were rope marks on his body and rope marks on the trees near the discovery of the body. The victim remained unidentified until June 30th, 1999, so for a couple years, and he was identified as 35-year-old William John Bill Malarengo. Another man's skull was eventually discovered in Charlotte County, Florida, on April 17, 1996. Police searched the surrounding woods and found the rest of the man as well as a second body. The first body, which had been dismembered, was identified as 25-year-old Kenneth Lee Smith. According to media reports, Smith's sister had called police after seeing a photo on the news of a faint tattoo still visible on the unidentified man's shoulder, and she was able to identify him. The second body was a man who had been murdered, mutilated, and sexually molested the day before, was identified as Richard Allen Montgomery. Montgomery's mother informed police that a few weeks before her son's death, she had met his new friend, and his new friend's name was Dan Conahan. Speculation became rampant about this time of a serial killer that the media began to dub as the Hog Trail Killings, named for the wooded areas in which the bodies were left. While Conahan was actually on trial, another skeleton was found in Port Charlotte, Florida on May 22, 1997. A county construction worker was cleaning brush on a dirt path when he discovered skeletal remains under a pepper tree. The coroner determined the victim had been deceased for many years. 10 months later, on March 16, 1998, DNA identified the remains as 24-year-old William Billy Charles Patton, who had actually disappeared in 1993. On October 19, 2000, skeletal remains were found in the wooded area of Toledo Blade Boulevard in Northport, Florida. In January of 2001, landscapers unearthed human bones on Grouper Hole Drive in Boca Grande. On November 28, 2001, during construction near US 41 in Charlotte Harbor, Florida, construction crews discovered human remains that were later determined to be male. On January 2002, a man was discovered by county employees near a landfill site off of Zernell Road in Punta Gorda. In July of 2024, 2 years ago, y'all, the remains were identified as belonging to Alejandro Lago, who was last seen on November of 2001 in Miami and was reported missing the following months. Investigators suspect that these discoveries are tied to Conahan. Hey guys, I just want to take a second to tell you about Maine Love Water. It's rooted in Maine, it's made with care, and it's designed to refresh body and mind. Stay hydrated, stay present, and enjoy Maine Love Water. Another thing that's tied to Conahan is known as the Fort Myers 8. On March 23, 2007, 8 skulls and skeletal remains were found in a wooded area in Fort Myers. This is the largest such discovery in Florida's history. These came to be known as the Fort Myers 8. In a forested area at Rockville and Arcadia Streets, a property surveyor had initially found 2 human skulls. He called it in, and then with the help of agencies in the area, cadaver dogs, and forensic experts, Fort Myers Police Department was able to retrieve a total of 8 full skeletons. No clothing nor remains of coffins, the bodies, no body bags, no nothing that would think that these were a normal burial. There were no tracks or other indications that someone had recently visited the area. Though a connection to a closed funeral home was considered possible, speculation soon turned to Conahan. The medical examiner ruled that the deaths were homicides, and Stanley Burton, star witness at Conahan's trial, had been attacked a mile within the site. So there was plenty to connect him to this discovery. On November 2007, 38-year-old John Blevins was the first to be identified. He had a transient lifestyle, and he had lived in the Fort Myers area before reported missing. He did have a criminal record for minor offenses, but he was last seen in 1995. According to his mother, he mentioned plans to go out, come back shortly, but never did. Shortly after Blevins' identification, a second victim was identified as 21-year-old Eric David Kohler. Kohler disappeared from Port Charlotte, Florida, sometime in 1995. In September of 2008, Jonathan James Tehei, who was 24, was to be the third victim identified. He was known as a drifter who was last seen in October of 1995 in the Fort Myers area. He called his mom to ask for money, and that's the last anybody heard from him. A victim who was formerly known as Victim H was actually identified in September of 2022 as 30-year-old Robert Ronald Bobby Soden of Fort Myers, who disappeared in 1996. Unfortunately, there are 4 that remain unidentified to this day. Cochran was finally arrested in May of 1996. Several witnesses directed the police to him, including one who had escaped when Cochran's car became stuck while driving down a dirt road and was able to get away from him. Later, police linked Cochran to a 1994 Fort Myers police report where Stanley Burden had been propositioned, tied to a tree, and nearly strangled, but managed to get away. Burden survived and had rope scars on his body, still visible 2 years later. Cochran's credit cards were subpoenaed and his house was searched, turning up evidence linking him to both Burden and Montgomery. On July 3, 1996, Conahan was arrested and brought to Lee County for the attempted murder of Burden. The following February, he was actually charged with murder of Montgomery, which is the only one he's actually been charged with, because the attempted murder charge of Burden case was actually dropped. Either way, they have him for Montgomery. Conahan was tried in the 1996 kidnapping and murder of victim Richard Allen Montgomery. It was in Punta Gorda, but he did waive his right to a jury trial and elected for a bench trial. Basically, a jury trial is you're tried by a peer of jurors. A bench trial is a trial by judge. He didn't want to be convicted by people he probably honestly had already heard about him and knew, so he elected for a judge trial or a bench trial. The star witness was, again, Stanley Burden, who authorities alleged had been nearly killed by Conahan in 1994. Conahan's attorney refuted that Burden was an imprisoned pedophile who was serving a 10 to 25 year sentence in Ohio and could not have been around him. On August 17, 1999, Judge William Blackwell deliberated for only 25 minutes and eventually found Conahan guilty of first-degree premeditated murder and kidnapping. Conahan succeeded in moving to the penalty phase of his trial in Collier County, but in November, a jury recommended a sentence of death. The judge who had already overseen the trial, Judge Blackwell, wholeheartedly agreed, and on December 10th, he was sentenced to die. Conahan is currently housed in the Union Correctional Institute in Rayford, Florida. I talked about that in another episode if you're interested. That is a very interesting prison. He is currently still on death row, to the last thing that I heard. Again, he's still as the prime suspect of the Fort Myers 8. But last I heard and last I found, he is still sitting on death row. He is 71 years old at this point, sitting in Rayford, awaiting his death sentence. I feel for the families. I also feel for the people who found the bodies. Because, you think you're going out, you're going to have just a normal day, and bam, you found a body. Not something I ever really want to come up against. I'm just saying. But thankfully they did find him. I hope he eventually gets tried or linked to the other murders just so the families have, a little bit of closure. I also hope they identify the other 4 of the Fort Myers 8. I think that's the worst thing in the world is to never know what happened to somebody, friends or family. And I'm sure that at first he was just seen as a normal, weird guy. Then he was probably somewhere along the lines of Florida man, and now he's a convicted killer. So hopefully his death sentence gets, taken out soon. I really do. If someone like that, maybe it's just me, but I wish that maybe like in the old days, you had a trial, you were convicted, and you were dead in a day. Maybe that's just me, but I wish we could go back to that. I'm sure not many of you agree with that, but that's just my feelings. And I'm sure if it was back in the day, though, most of these Florida men would be dead anyways. Today's Florida man actually comes from, God, I just read about this too. It's out of Kissimmee. Florida man arrested for exposing himself in public and fornicating with a vacuum. That's the actual thing. He fornicated with a vacuum, y'all. It happened on January 22nd. Police were summoned to deal with a partially clothed man who was exposing himself outside a neighbor's home and engaged in sexual performance with a vacuum cleaner. Osceola County Sheriff got the bizarre call, but the 51-year-old suspect had already left the area. However, statements contended that the victim who observed the behavior told detectives that he saw the man and began recording. That's why you're never free from recording. Just always assume you're being recorded. Police chose not to comment on the sexual performance, but of course, police later learned that the Florida man and his wife lived in a home within a private development and also operated an Airbnb outside of a nearby residence. Detectives started looking into the situation and realized that a complaint was made on January 21st regarding a man that was walking in a shared hallway space nude. This guy just couldn't keep it to himself. They eventually found him. An arrest warrant was issued for the man. The last name is Westerhold. And he was arrested in Oviedo on Tuesday, January 27th. So, yeah. Always assume you're being recorded. And if you have some things like that you kind of like, maybe keep them to yourself. Maybe let's do that. Yeah. All right, guys. I hope that you learned something today. I'm not going to say fun because the Hog Trail Killer, no, that's not fun. It's not a nice man. That's just another sad part of Florida history that we talked about today. If you do have a topic that you want to learn about or hear about or just hear me talk, let me know. Feel free to say hi. I love each and every one of you guys, and I'm so thankful that you guys are my listeners. Please try to have a good week. Hopefully it doesn't get cold again, but do wear your sunscreen if you're out in the sun. You can get a sunburn in Florida. I've had that happen in every month of the year, including January and February. So happy February, guys. Drink your water. Be nice. And as always, that's your daily dose of sunshine.
This podcast is a production of Unfiltered Studios. If you would like to know more about joining Unfiltered Studios, please visit our website at unfpod.com for more information.